In this video, I'm going to look at two recent pasts, the present, and the future of the internet. To start, I'm going to talk about the period of time when the World Wide Web was new. Then I'm going to talk about the period of time after the launch of the iPhone. Move forward 10 years to 2017, which it is right now. And finally, we'll talk about the internet of the future. And in these comments, I mean to address whether we should think about the internet as a failure or a process of constant change. My first experiences with the internet were when I was a teenager, and this was just shortly after the World Wide Web was launched. So I was active in a lot of spaces like Usenet, chat rooms in the 90s, and web pages in general, GeoCities, that sort of thing. When I look back on my personal experiences, I am certainly nostalgic. I had really a great opportunity to make use of the internet as a place to complicate my identity and meet other people without the traditional constraints like location or just general context that is necessary to meet another individual, have a conversation. But it's very important to point out that my experience is my experience. I don't want to speak for everybody because looking back, when I look back, I see the friendships I made. But if you look at the research, a lot of the problems we complain about today, a lot of the problems that make the internet a very hostile space for users were present even then. Things like harassment, things like the white supremacist groups, the racists, the fascists, they were organizing sometimes in their own spaces, but also coming into regular culture-oriented Usenet groups and harassing people. That is not so unique to our day. And even more important, why I don't think we should really be too nostalgic about that period of time is that in the 90s, there was a pretty significant digital divide issue. And I don't necessarily know that the first users of the internet are a particularly elite group of people besides being of a particular wealth and privilege already. So I do feel like it's very important to talk about the internet then as a very, like, not just a self-selected group, but a group that was organized based on opportunity to access the internet. But I mean, ultimately, a lot of the nostalgia for that, a lot of the nostalgia for that time has to do with it being a time before these major corporations, Facebook, Google, Apple, before they came to that unimaginable power. But I also wonder if we compare that to, the military's influence in the development of the internet, whether we're being a little bit naive about the question of ownership. The iPhone and the smartphone in general completely changed how users experience the internet, in terms of killing the metaphor of the internet as a place, because you could talk about cyberspace or the internet as a place to go to in the past because you probably experienced it on a computer in your living room, or maybe sometimes taking your laptop to a coffee shop. Um, but here it was on you, on your person. You had this opportunity to share things instantly because that's when social media became much more prevalent, much more powerful. And another thing to keep in mind is these past 10 years have been a process of more and more people from around the world having access to the internet and these social networks. And it's unwise to talk about that in terms of social change. That's definitely overblown. I think there's a lot written about how, you know, I mean, just look at the world's politically today. I mean, Facebook is definitely not making the world more democratic. But on the other hand, more and more people have access to publishing and getting their word out there. And in some ways, that visibility has amounted to something significant. And I see that especially in the case of maybe social justice issues, in terms of activism in the United States around police brutality. And again, I think it's just a little bit unwise to we should think about this in terms of the users themselves organizing rather than the platforms, and that's where a lot of that analysis that happened maybe about 2009, 2010. That's why a lot of that analysis looks naive, because it's the responsibility is the platform, whereas users are using tools that are available to them when they organize through the internet, and they could use other tools if we had other tools, or if other tools were more common to them. And of course, the other aspect to that is that that level of organizing is not just unique to the good people. I mean, the bad activists, they can use these tools too. Part of the reason I'm resistant to a lot of recent conversation about the internet as a failure is it feels like too sudden a switch from the conversation of the internet as a utopia. And also, I think there are two concepts that need to be differentiated here. Do you think it's a failure because of the users, the people, or do you think it's a failure because of the platforms and the organizing institutions and the government involvement or the surveillance, all those aspects? Because that conversation is very different from what I often see, which is just talk of the kind of users who are on these platforms and don't really have a whole lot of rights or respect for the platforms themselves. I am not nostalgic for the kind of demographics that were prevalent in online communities in the 90s. I think we've certainly improved in terms of getting more people online and able to communicate this way. But the area that has frustrated me in recent years is the lack of communication with their users, this sense that their frustration is profitable if it means more clicks, and the ad money that has flood into these social networks, where if you've posted your entire life from, you know, or you think of a child whose parents have put all of their baby photos on Facebook. If your entire life is on Facebook, it's very difficult to carve out independence because they've gone really deep inside people's values and relationships. Um, I don't know if that's so. I don't think that's a user's failure. I think that's manipulation on the level of Facebook. Um, but that's a question, I think, is like, are you blaming the users who had, you know, it's not their decisions. They have been, you know, manipulated into behaving certain ways. That's the what we're really talking about here. What's funny is it's conversations like this that fill me with hope, if maybe just a little bit of hope, because I think being cynical about these platforms is a great process of change. I mean, if you look at typical tech criticism 10 years ago, it's blaming users for their own lack of self control. It's blaming ourselves, blaming others, just like classic misanthropy applied to people as they use the internet. Um, but now the criticism is being leveled at the companies and what they're driving. Um, so I feel like we're at this point, like, you know, like the gingerbread house and Hansel and Gretel, that people are now aware of what they've stepped inside and that it was a trap. And carrying that cynicism through the technologies as they arrive in time, whether that's self-driving cars, whether that's various applications of machine learning and artificial intelligence, that cynicism, that expectation of accountability is is a positive development. All of a sudden, we have a great deal of interest and expectations for the press to hold these companies accountable. And if there's, again, this is just a sliver of optimism I have, but I do see that change away from the very accommodating tech press before. Um, that's what fills me with hope, at least.